Hi, and welcome everyone to wholesoulschool and Foundation's first Fireside Chats for November 2019. My name is Marie Mohler, and I am an author, intuitive, and co-founder of wholesoulschool and Foundation. I am here with my co-host and co-founder, Lacy Frazer, who is a clinical psychologist by training and a practicing life and leadership coach and consultant today. We want to remind our listeners that the mission of wholesoulschool and Foundation is to educate, enrich, integrate, and liberate the heart and soul in people worldwide. We also support projects and products that are specifically designed to educate, empower, and inspire people whose lives have been impacted by incarceration. We hold a core belief that the conversation is the education. And we love to provide this important information and content to you to inspire and ignite hope, healing, personal growth, and inner awakening to the power of your whole soul, and ultimately, a desire to release your armor, awaken your self-awareness, engage your gifts, and be who you really are in the world. So I first want to welcome Lacy to this conversation today.
Hi, Marie. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you here. And I want to welcome our listeners to this powerful conversation today. So thanks to everyone listening for joining us, for tuning in. This month, we are going to be focusing on the theme of integrating and weaving together the bigger picture of where we have journeyed this year thus far. It's a lot of information and energy to review and to reweave back into our conscious awareness. So we're going to be doing this in two parts. November is going to be part one, and in December, we're going to continue our review process to bring it full circle, right?
Right. Exactly.
I think it would be a good place to start to simply read our themes and blog topics that we've covered in our many conversations this year, Lacy. And then maybe we can go back to some of the core insights we both really love about these topics. We may find time to do that today, but we're also going to review some other things related to this, like the soul's journey of moving from a human, more 3D perspective of our lives to a soul perspective, a whole soul perspective, or, for some of the people that might be listening, a 5D perspective of their lives, right? The higher perspective of why we're really here once we're activated in our spiritual awareness, right?
Really, it's a spiritual unfoldment, that it's just always happening.
It's always happening.
Yeah.
But we've attempted in our blogs and in our podcasts for this first year to be sort of spotlighting some of the phases and stages that people go through in that unfoldment.
Yes, exactly.
And so that's what we're going to be reviewing a little bit today. So I was just going to read the sort of titles of the themes, and then I'm also going to read the films, the names of the films that we also focused on. So for some of you just joining us for the first time, you might hear this review, and we welcome you to go back into the archives of the conversations we've had that are timeless and can support people in all phases and stages of your journey. All these topics that we've delved into in a greater detail in other podcasts. So without further ado, in January of 2019, our topic and theme was the ego and the conditioned self. And we focused on insights from Wayne Dyer a lot in that month. Mm-hmm. And the film that we spotlighted and discussed was called The Shift. Fantastic movie. And so in February, we focused on the topic, the clever ego's defenses and the armor we wear. That was a really rich conversation because we have a lot of ego defenses and we have a lot of armor in our world today, people all around the world. But that's what we've been conditioned that we need to make it, to make it in this world, to survive in this world. There's this belief that we need to have this armor. And the film associated with that, with February's theme of the clever ego's defenses and the armor we wear, is The Ultimate Gift. One of my favorites. In March, our theme was self-awareness, integrating shadow and light. And the film was The Shadow Effect. It was Debbie Ford's work, talking all about the shadow. And also, we talked about our awareness of integrating our light and our shadow aspects. In April, we focused on the journey of personal transformation, the journey of transformation, and we spotlighted a little bit the other sub-themes to that of vulnerability and humility. And the film that we focused on in that journey of personal transformation was Finding Joe. I think that's one of my all-time favorite films.
Yeah, me too.
In May, we talked about the energy and the law of attraction. And the film we focused on to spotlight some of those themes and to create a conversation around that was The Secret. It was all about manifesting and getting in the energy and being the vibration of what it is that you want to attract. So powerful messages in that film and in that month's themes. In June, we continued some of that, extending that awareness of the law of attraction, right, Lacy?
And we talked a lot about creative visualization in June.
June, visioning and manifesting and creative visualization, exactly. And the film we focused on was Thoughts Become Things, the film by Mike Dooley.
Yes.
Which was really great. There were some really great insights. I think he had like 6 or 8 or 10 points that he really made about that visualization process. And
my favorite part of that was how he talks about the cursed hows, that block you from really bringing into form what you want, because we get so focused on, well, how's it going to happen? And when we do that, it automatically blocks us. So it's a journey. It's a journey about becoming, a creator being without having even putting the blocks in our own way.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's a powerful part of that film.
Yeah. And I was just going to add, so that's a big part of in this journey, because this whole year has been a journey. We are learning about ourselves as creator beings. We are learning about ourselves as being much more powerful than we understand ourselves to be. And so when we talk about the law of attraction and the energy in May, and then we focused on visioning and manifesting in June, and we have that information there for people, it's really a powerful turning point when you start to realize that you are creating your life. And that film, Thoughts Become Things, where Mike Dooley, he really makes that point about the cursed hows, which I love. That was a big turning point in my journey, because I think I was muscling through the hows myself.
Oh, amen.
I think a lot of us go through those stages and phases, and not to say that still can't crop up for us. So powerful, powerful messages in those core months. And then in July, we moved into a topic of 100% responsibility for creating our reality. So we were focused on the law of attraction, visioning and manifesting, and now we start to gain an awareness that we're 100% responsible for creating the reality that we're living in. And the film we focused on that particular month was 1,000 Words with Eddie Murphy. So that was probably maybe the least spiritual movie that we've chosen, but it really illustrated that point on how we have to be impeccable with our words and really pay attention to what we're creating with our words. I loved that one.
Yeah, me too.
In August, our topic was integrating science and spirituality. That was a huge topic because there's just a vast amount of information. So many wonderful teachers, Bruce Lipton, Lynn McTaggart, Greg Braden, Einstein, Tesla. There's so many fabulous thinkers who brought information through in the field of science to activate a higher consciousness in humanity. And they spoke through the lens of science, but I think they were also leaving us breadcrumbs in their work for others to follow if you had the eyes to see. And so I loved that month's, those conversations. And the film that we focused on in August was The Living Matrix. And that was really powerful. I think the one takeaway, and we might review some of these a little bit more, but was when Bruce Lipton says in The Living Matrix that we might be made up of trillions and trillions of cells, but those trillions of cells aren't separated cells. They're a living community. And ever since we reviewed that for this podcast, I've really walked with that consciousness ever since. So even though I'd seen the film, just like anybody listening could have always said, oh, I've seen The Shift, or, oh, I've seen The Secret. When we watch it again, we watch it in the vibration or the awareness that we have at the time we watch it. So there can be benefit to going back and seeing these things again and again.
Yes.
And you'll always pull out more things. And so that was a big takeaway from what Bruce Lipton said. I just really appreciate that. And I see that I'm a living community, basically, of cells. And so are you. And together, our communities are one living community. And that's true that extends to the whole world, right? We are a living community on this planet. And we've been trained, especially we talked about this in integrating science and spirituality, where the Newtonian physics was teaching us that everything is just a bunch of parts, right? That really don't have a whole lot to do together. Right? They're not really related in a bigger picture. And we are all about integration this month, right? And weaving the bigger picture. When you look at a bigger picture, you realize that things are interconnected. So that was a really big month of a lot of information with the integrating science and spirituality, and still is. We could spend a year probably just talking about that topic alone. In September, we focused on the topic of engaging our spiritual nature. And that was really a really wonderful month. We started to take the turn more into the flow of our soul as a presence, as an essence, as a consciousness inside us. I remember, I believe it was that month. Yes, it was. We had Jeff Jones in a podcast with us for the transformation talks that we did.
Yep.
And he was so fantastic talking about how he engaged his spiritual nature through the sweat lodges and his time he spends in the garden and the way he used to run around the track in prison. He had a number of ways that he found as he was awakening, as he was stepping up in his journey to tap into something more, right? To connect with something bigger than just himself. And so Jeff was a great illustrator of those messages that month. The film we focused on in September was Awake, The Life of Yogananda. And I think that was another powerful film. All of these have nuggets of amazing wisdom. There have been so many teachers before us now in these times, and there will be many teachers after us, right?
Right.
They come through to help elevate the greater whole. And while many people on the planet, or a lot of our movies or the media that we see around us is modeling or reflecting to us how separated and violent and divided and competitive we are, it's important to have the messages that Lacy and I are sharing, that we are in fact wired to be collaborative and cooperative and kind and compassionate. That's our true wiring. And we've just had a lot of messages that have kind of snowballed over the decades and centuries, really, that tell a story over and over, and what you repeat persists, right? So we keep telling these stories in the history books, and I won't get started on our educational system and go too far with that, but I witness in my own children's experiences, and I remember my own, you write papers and papers and papers on World War II. Over and over, we dredge up the old stories of how we don't get along and the terrible things we've done to each other. I can't even think of a time that my kids were writing a paper on how we all got along and where things were working in the world and where we were that living community. You just don't see it. That's not what they focus on in our educational system. So when we all go through a similar system and we're all required to take those similar tests, that's the similar story that we're all carrying around, that we are divided. But when we engage something more, when we engage our spiritual nature, which we talked about in September, and in October, we talked about living a spiritual life. And we're connecting deeper and deeper to how shifting our perception from how separated we are to how in tune we are, to how connected we are, to how organic that feeling is inside all of us. And the film that we focused on, it was a film presentation by Michael Beckwith, and that film was called The Answer Is You. And I believe, if I remember, you can see that on YouTube. And we had links in that month so that you could find that material. So we've been on quite a journey since January of 2019. I still think that if you look back in the archives at any point now or in the coming months and weeks ahead as we enter 2020. Right? There's so much going on in the world. There's so much change unfolding. There's so much, I believe, there's an increase in humanity's consciousness. There's a shift taking place. Wayne Dyer, the movie The Shift, right? A lot of these films and these people, Lynn McTaggart, Bruce Lipton, Mike Dooley, you can mention any of these people, and they all are aware that something's changing. To people who don't understand that there's a larger consciousness that's shifting on this planet, it just might look like chaos or craziness, right? But really, there's this sort of out of the disorder, a new order is coming. There's a new organization of our world through another level of consciousness. And so we've been talking about the initial kind of the experiences that most people have in their 3D lives and their regular everyday lives with their egos and their armor. And then we've been in the last few months in a higher feeling state about engaging our spiritual nature, talking about meditation, yoga, other practices to connect with our spirit, gardening, taking a hike in the woods, journaling. There's many, many things that people can do that is a spiritual practice for them. And so that's where we are. And this month in November, our topic is integration, weaving the bigger picture. And this is part 1 of that conversation. We're going to continue that in December. And the film we're going to focus on this month, I'll just debut now. We put it in the blog, I think, is the Celestine Prophecy. It's based on the work of James Redfield. And so I don't know, where do you want to lead us now, Lacy? So we've reviewed at least our topics and the films associated with those topics.
Yeah, I think it might be interesting for our listeners. I was just thinking as you were talking about how it was probably a year ago that we were sitting and brainstorming about
right?
what our topics would be for starting in January of 2019. And I will tell you that the first thing I called on within myself in devising these topics and the sequence of these topics was the group that I ran in prison. When I taught in prison, and I had a year-long program, which is essentially what this is here in front of us, a year-long program.
Right.
And there was a bit of a trajectory that I followed. And so it was very natural for me to come up with these topics, because it is these topics reflect a natural unfoldment from sort of our understanding our human self to moving to understanding our more spiritual and more etheric self. And, these are not necessarily popular topics in any jail or prison or, frankly, really anywhere.
Right.
So I think it was a very unique thing that I was able to speak this language and offer this material to the group. And I just want to say, many of our listeners may be also aware that we have created a pitch video about a film that we're trying to make. And that film is really about, or will contain at least, a number of the men who went through my program who
Yes.
transformed their lives. And I'm
Who
saying,
engaged this process.
Exactly.
And what I was going to say to add to what you were saying is that, this essentially what we've done at Whole Soul over the last year is that you've given people a language for the journey. And I think that's what you did with the men.
Exactly.
You gave them a language that at some level, each one of them already knew, because we all know this language. So while it's not in popular culture today, it's a universal language that transcends time. And so it's much bigger than our little perceptions of time or what's popular or what's the in thing. Spirituality over the last number of centuries hasn't really been the in thing, as you can look at our, predominant culture and the way people live. But it is a thread that runs through all of us. And when you introduce this course, right, these concepts in the prison environment, there were people who were ready for those messages because they were ready to re-access that language, re-access this kind of, I don't know if I would call it a technology even, but it's kind of a spiritual technology, a technology of the spirit when you get the language back inside yourself.
Yes, but I also think that, what was different there is obviously time. You and I, we spend 1 hour twice a month talking about these themes, and these themes are like guideposts, you know. But when you're working with somebody else, you're working with a group of people, and you use these themes as guideposts, you're really, and we had 5 hours a week together to really go deeper. And so the transformation was from the inside out with these men. And the reason I'm bringing this up is a couple reasons. One, obviously the energy of this film we want to make and this movement we're creating is very ripe, and it's in our consciousness because we're running this fundraising campaign right now. But also because when I look at this list, I'm so filled with love and appreciation for the journey that those men went on, and I know that this list, these topics, are the guideposts of the journey, and if you engage them, from the inside out, you really, really can transform your life. So of course, I'd love to just go back and elaborate a little bit on how these themes really weave together in a very general kind of way.
Okay.
Because I call this, from the journey from the human to soul. And I think we're really, really, our human selves have been the driver of our train for so long. And I think before anybody can really tap into their spiritual nature, they have to gain an awareness of their human selves. And you really can't fully engage any kind of spirituality, in my opinion, until you really have a handle on your personality and your defensive structure and your triggers and your patterns of thinking and your patterns of limiting belief and things like that. I just think that's really important to kind of look into with yourself. And that's certainly what we did in our program. And we always began with learning about the ego and the conditioned self. Because that's really where kind of the human being, that's the seat, right, of the human self. So we learned about our conditioning, we learned about our shaping, we learned about how we learn from the environment that we grow up in, and we take in people's beliefs as our own, and we take in patterning from other people, and we begin to develop a personality, and the ego is in charge of that house.
Yes.
And an ego, as Wayne Dyer says, stands for edge God out, which in a way makes sense, because when we're really in our full-blown human self, when we're unaware of our human patterns, when we're not willing to talk about them, or we're really defended, we're not connected to God or a higher power or even our higher self or spiritual self.
Right.
So it's not a bad thing to talk about our ego. We all have an ego. We all have patterns and conditioning. We all have defenses. And it's really, if you really have a commitment to transform and move forward and evolve and unfold, then you will look at this in yourself. Mm-hmm. You will identify these patterns, and you will, gradually let them go and replace them with something new. So a big piece of that is moving into February was our discussion around the defenses, and the suit of armor that we wear. And Marie, interject at any point.
No, I think you're doing a great job. I'm definitely resonating and listening to what you're sharing. And I think, the only thing I would interject, since you did invite me in this moment, is to say that as we go through looking at the ego and becoming aware of our conditioning, and we begin to see the armor that we've assembled in our lives to cope with the conditions of being a human being in this world as it is anyway, is as we let the armor go, as we start to see the armor for what it is, we start to realize that we are the ones that put it into place because of our response to our environment and our conditioning, right? As we're letting it go, the one thing that I would say about all of these stages is that there's an opportunity to appreciate it versus just try and kick it to the curb.
Oh, 100%. Such a good point.
You'd miss the gift if you don't find a way to appreciate how it served you and, what your soul received out of that learning experience and how it protected your human self, or at least you perceived that it was protecting you, which at the time you must have really believed that and needed that to be your tool. And when we're on this journey from human to soul, when we're starting to have an interest in becoming more conscious and aware and awake, we're looking for different tools.
Yeah.
So if we can look at the armor as a tool of what served us for a time, we can really appreciate. Without that armor, we might have had a harder time here.
Well, and we could have been a lot more vulnerable to environmental
Right.
experiences as a kid or whatever.
Right.
It just reminds me of another Wayne Dyer quote. It might be Wayne quoting someone else. I can't remember, but he says, what was true in the morning becomes a lie in the afternoon. And that's, in a sense, kind of what you're saying, that you can interpret that in many ways. But one of the ways I used to teach it is that what was true for you in the morning of your life, which could be the first half of your life,
Right.
and the defenses that you had, or however you emotionally protected yourself or physically protected yourself, what was true for you then is no longer really needed now. And it kind of becomes a lie in the latter half of your life, or on the other side of the spiritual awakening, or whatever
Right.
you want to
Exactly.
choose.
Whatever your language
is
about it.
Yeah, because we don't need that anymore. We often don't need that defensive structure as much anymore.
And you learn new tools. You
Right.
learn new ways to feel safe and solid and grounded and happy and creative inside yourself without needing all of that heavy armor.
Right.
But in the beginning, which is what we're talking about, in
Yes.
January and
In the
February,
beginning.
in the beginning of this awakening journey, this
Yeah.
journey of personal transformation where we become more aware of who we are and who we've been, we take a good look. And so it is important to appreciate the tools that we had at that time. And then once you've taken you've received the gift of that part of your journey, when you know that you've really received the lesson, you've asked for the lesson, you're recovering what the lesson is or discovering it again. That's when you can say, I really appreciate the insight that came from that experience, or the fact that I could see my resilience and my creativity in a difficult situation. There's a lot of ways, as long as we're willing to look at the truth of what it was, we don't have to put any spin on it. We can
Right.
just really appreciate it. Inside some even negative behaviors that we all might have, there is likely a skill that we were exercising, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of like, when we moved into March's theme of shadow and light, what you're talking about is almost the light side of the shadow.
The light side of the shadow, exactly.
Right? So it's really understanding that these thinking patterns and behavior patterns and emotional patterns that we have, while on the one hand they might feel dark, or they might feel ineffective, or they might be hurtful to other people or to ourselves, we also can recognize in this stage that there is a light side to it, that we can appreciate that we had those things, or that we protected in the way we did, or we defended in the way we did back then, because it helped us survive. It helped us grow.
Yeah.
And we gain that appreciation. I really like how you said that. And I know I'm going to interview Michael Norieski for this month's Transformation Talks podcast. And I'm not going to spill the beans, but I know he's going to talk a little bit about that very concept. So I'm excited about that. So in April, we moved into more description of the journey of personal transformation and the important role that humility and vulnerability plays in our personal change.
Yeah.
And I cannot express this enough, that when you really go into this sort of transformational alchemy with yourself, when you look at your triggers and you look at your defenses and you look at your ego and you do it in front of other people. In other words, you're like in my group, we would look at these very hard things in, individually, but within a group, in front of other people, in front of other men. It was not an easy thing. And these men had to have a lot of courage to do that. But I'll tell you, I will forever, ever, ever remember so many very poignant moments when somebody had a breakthrough and allowed themselves to feel vulnerable in a moment among their peers, and they got to the root of an emotion, or they got to the root of a behavior, or they admitted hurting somebody, or whatever it was, and from that point on, from that vulnerability point, that person qualitatively changed from that point on and never went back.
Yeah.
I mean, I really can say that, never went back. So vulnerability is...
There's some real, again, I would use the word gem or gift or treasure in letting ourselves get real and get truthful with ourselves about what we really feel. And sometimes that is buried under layers and we actually can't see what that treasure is. So that's why you have to go into the layers, because the gift or that treasure is waiting underneath that. But for a lot of people who either, think, no, I'm fine, I'm good. You see that a lot, and you get that a lot. You say, how you doing? Good. Grand. I'm feeling good. Everything's good. And, and when you see different people's lives, you can see they may want that to be true, but you can see there are layers they're likely not looking at in their life. And you can't really be good or grand or fine when you're not really looking at that. So, for the men to have the willingness to go into that vulnerability, into that humility, in front of themselves and in front of other people, it is profound. And I think, that's where, people listening to this call, sometimes when you start this journey, you want to seek out other like-minded people. You want to find people who are speaking some of this language, not because they can do the work for you, because nobody could do the work for you. None of those men would have had the experiences of transformation that they had if they expected the guy sitting next to them to do their work. It just doesn't work like that. Right. It's energy, and you are a field of energy. And if your energy isn't working itself through and getting in touch with what it really is, nobody else can step into your energy field and do that for you.
Right.
But the awareness of that, the people who do step up for it, if you can find a group of people, it just starts with one or two other people. You don't have to have 50 people speaking this language. You just have to have a couple. And a couple is like a whole community.
Right. No,
right?
exactly.
Think about the trillions of cells, again, that we are. Yeah. I'm going to keep going back to Bruce Lipton's, what he said. But if I'm a living community of cells and you're living a community of cells, well, we just expanded a huge community of cells by the fact that we spend so much time together. We are definitely in sync about a lot of things. And that helps us when we're struggling, or when we're challenged with something, or whether we want to create something. We have quite a community of energy between the two of us that's working through those things, or that's creating those things. And for people listening, that journey of personal transformation is also about awakening to a feeling inside that you're interested in finding a more authentic community. You're interested in finding a community that is willing to see who you really are. And the men in those groups, because of the tone and the atmosphere that you set inside those groups, over time they began to feel safe in an unlikely environment, prison, where they could begin to get real and get to the truth of what's under the layers, so that they could extract the treasure and have that experience. But I recommend that too, is that people are aware, not that you have to go running out there and find your community, but it's an awareness that it is a natural part of this process, that communities like collaboration. They like to cooperate. They like to co-create. All those co-words, right? All those
I think
coming
there's an
together
inherent
words.
There's an inherent desire for that, but our conditioning and our cultural conditioning doesn't always support that. In fact, it's more about separation. It's more about competition. It's more about comparison and judgment and things like that.
And that's where you say people living from that place, you would expect to see more armor.
Right.
So people living from that place are going to be armored up, and that's going to be the world that makes sense to them.
And you, as a spiritual being, as somebody who's evolving and choosing spiritual evolvement and transformation, simply walks past that. Simply lets that pass.
It doesn't attract you
don't engage
anymore.
It, and then it doesn't.
It's not attractive anymore.
Right.
And it's not a bad thing. You just realize, oh, that's the tool I used to use.
Right.
But really, I feel more powerful. I feel more empowered when I'm connected with others, when I'm connected with that authentic self inside myself. And again, all the ways we're talking earlier in the journey, in this past year, or in your own life journey, these aren't dots on a map that you can track, by a date or an exact happening. It just kind of evolves over time. But the awareness that you can carry, that these are things that happen to all of us on the journey, that it starts to become more important to us, and we start to really value being with people who that are on the journey or talking the language of the journey, who are seekers, who are interested in discovering, right? That they don't think they're already made. They understand that they're creating themselves in their lives every day, in every moment. So the more we surround ourselves with people who value that way of being and that way of living, the more we can, it's easier to embrace the journey.
Oh, yeah.
It's easier to embrace the journey. So just anybody who resonates with what we're talking about, and when you do start to shift, the risk of shifts, there are some things that it's important to know, and some of the old things that you used to do, your old habits, some friendships or connections you had, and you might have synced up on something that now no longer lights you up, no longer attracts you, and so you have things to talk about less, and you can just notice that the quality of the conversation and the relationship changes. And it could even be true of something that was a hobby of yours or an interest of yours. The types of movies that you watch, the type of music that you listen to.
Sure.
Things shift, right? I think it's Wayne Dyer who says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Yeah, he must be guiding us today, I think.
I know, he's in the podcast with us, that's for sure.
Well, let me bring it back to just the themes here and the unfoldment that occurred over the last, or has occurred over the last 10 months. I'm going to go back again. One of the things that differentiate, I think, you and I, Marie, is I'm a little bit more of a structured thinker, and I'm a little bit more of a linear thinker. And I love to parcel information, offer it in small packages for people to understand. So if that's helpful for people, I hope it is. And if not, I hope you can tolerate me for those who...
It's essential. I mean, the two of us are really quite a package, where you like to parcel it in the doses and paste the information. And I just sort of stream what comes through, because that's what more intuitives do. We're just in the moment, and information comes through us.
Right.
And so I always trust the right information to show up when it's needed.
Yeah. No,
It's
so complimentary.
It's so complimentary.
Yeah. I love that. So I just want to go back, because I think this 12-month journey that we've been on here, as we've said, is a reflection of the 12-month curriculum that I did with the men, and it's really it's the breadcrumbs to the spiritual unfolding if you choose to follow it. Okay, and so we have the ego, then we were armored up, then we go deep into self-awareness and recognize and appreciate both our shadow and light, and we move into our vulnerability, and we become more humble human beings as we allow ourselves to be vulnerable. And as we're doing all of that, our armor is falling off, and our ego is getting smaller. And this is when we took a turn in May to really talk about energy. And I think we needed I know, working with men in prison, I needed to be able to give them the foundation of being human in their first 5 or 6 months and really tunnel deep into the humanness before I introduced the concept of energy and the law of attraction and quantum physics and things like that. And in May, that's what we did. And we talked a lot about Einstein and the quantum field and heart math and our electromagnetic nature and how what we put out, we get back, what we reap, we sow. And this is an actual scientific explanation for that. And, you know, it's still, that scientific explanation is still connected to our intellect, which is connected to our more egoic self, but it's a little bit, but we're moving in the direction
It's a bridge.
It is a bridge. Thank you. That's exactly right. That's the one word to sum it up is it's a bridge. And May and June were real bridges because it was all about energy and creative visualization and what does it mean to manifest. And we start to learn that we are not just these human shells. You know, we are not just this mind and this body. We are actually so much more, and we are interacting with the universal energies all the time. Right. And once we start to learn that we are electromagnetic beings, then we have a responsibility to manage our electromagnetic nature.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And there isn't anything that is, I've been teaching it for like 12 years and I still get goosebumps and I still am in awe over how powerful this information is and how powerful we are as creator beings. And once we learn about our energy field, once we learn that we live in an energetic universe, once we learn that we can manage the positive or negative charge of that vibration.
Yeah.
And so thus we are creating and manifesting and managing our life circumstances through our energy field.
Yeah.
You know? And we're 100% responsible
for
creating our own reality because of that.
Right.
Right? And
exactly.
that's where we go in July. That's where we went in July.
Right.
So once we learned about our energy and once we learned how to manage our energy,
right.
now we know we're 100% responsible for our energy, thus 100% responsible for creating our reality because it's all created out of the energy.
Right. Right. With power comes responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility.
Yes.
And when you wake up to yourself as this incredible, powerful, beautiful, talented, gifted being here on the planet for a time, you also wake up to the reality too that there's responsibilities that come with that, and you are creating your reality in every moment. And people listening to this that may resonate, or some people it might be the first time you're hearing that, but we really do create our world. If we're a living community of trillions of cells that lives in a conscious living universe.
Yes.
Right? The universe is a living consciousness. It's a living energy. And so it's constantly interacting. The seen and the unseen are having a conversation all the time. And so it's important that we understand that we are 100% responsible for creating our reality, because in that conversation that's happening, you're half of that conversation.
Exactly.
At least.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
very important.
And it's very, our thoughts, you know, and we talk a lot about how our thoughts inform our vibration.
Exactly.
Right? So we really are really the masters of ourselves, if we could understand that. It's very powerful.
Yeah, it is very powerful.
So again, we're kind of in the bridge times in May, June, and July. And then even in August, we start to introduce sort of how science and spirituality
weave together and connect.
We interact, and that was a lot of fun. And there's a lot of those films out there, especially through Hay House, and a lot of wonderful quantum physicists and scientists who are really who were scientists through and through until they had experiences that showed them something different, and then they started to realize that actually science was catching up with spirituality. Right. You know, rather than the other way around.
Right. So, and what I felt in those months also is, number one, the courage, go back to the courage of those scientists to step out away from the pack, right? When there was a different collective consciousness that was more popular, they were seeing things and trying to share things and give us the language of what they were seeing. And we're waking up more and more now, decades later, from Einstein and Tesla. Right. And I always forget that other physicist's name, like Schallinger or somebody. But anyway, whoever that was, late 1800s.
Yeah.
You know, there were many that were trying to give us this information as they were discovering it. And think about how way ahead of their time they really were. And the courage it takes to share information when most of humanity is not awake to that understanding.
Well, right? And there were also other people that were awake, that were in power, that didn't want humanity to know this information.
Right, exactly.
So,
and just like Debbie Ford, we have light and shadow, and right? And that exists inside all of us and exists on this planet. There's a duality here.
Right.
And so, it's in every aspect of human life and all life on this planet.
Right.
But waking up to that and starting to, one of the first things you need is a willingness and an openness and awareness, right? Those are some of the skills we initially open to as we become aware of the duality in this realm, in this world. And also as we find our way back to seeing everything as part of a greater whole. And so it is quite a journey that we all are making. We're all in process.
It's awesome. I mean, it just, I don't know that everybody feels this way, but, and I definitely have my bad days and my ego might come out and I might see a piece of that armor still stuck on there, but the whole thing, my whole existence exists within the concept of awareness and consciousness. Mm-hmm. And I know that whatever's going on is part of my growth and my expansion, so
it's a reflection to you of an opportunity for awareness.
Yes.
I mean, really,
always.
Our lives are that opportunity.
It's a giant experiential experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's just wrap up with just remembering our movement into September, which was all about engaging our spiritual nature, and then in October actually living that spiritual life. So we've moved from the ego and the conditioned self. We've broken down our defenses. We've learned about shadow and light. We journeyed through vulnerability and humility. We move in understanding ourselves as energetic beings. We now learn to use the energy to vision and manifest. We understand now that we got to take responsibility for creating our reality. We are learning. Part of that responsibility is understanding how science and physics and our spirituality are all connected. They're not separated. And now we're living a life that is guided by and more grounded in our, I call it non-physical self, our soul self, a higher nature, a deeper power, something within us. Yeah. We understand that we are animated by spirit. And I think, again, Wayne Dyer, he must be here with us. But he talks about the word inspire, which in Latin or in some Italian, it's in spirit.
Yes.
And so we are living an inspired life. We are living a life from our spirit. And how do we engage our spiritual nature? And how do we live for, that's our core. How do we have that lead us every day? And back in January, we were talking about how our ego leads us every day.
Right.
So we're really moving along this spectrum, or whatever we want to call it.
It's a full circle journey.
And
it's the hero's journey. It's what they show in the Finding Joe movie very well. There's this arc of our own story, right? Where we are initiated, the call is put out, we're called to these experiences, we're summoned to these experiences, we have initiations, we go through tests, we go through challenges, we summon our skills and our gifts to come back around that arc in our own story. And to start uncovering the gems and the treasures and the talents we really do have. We start to figure out what's more real, what's authentic inside us. And we connect with something inside us that it transcends time. It's connected to something much larger than our small human consciousness really is capable of. And it's part of what sets us free. It's part of what liberates us from the conditioned beliefs that permeate this world, right? That make this world so small. When we are thinking more from a Newtonian perspective, where everything is separate and divided and competitive, you add Darwin in there, survival of the fittest. These were theories that they were putting forth, that they were testing to some degree for sure, but they were trying to figure out, what is this world about, right? These were just philosophies, and you mix some science in there, right? But perhaps what they saw at that time period maybe was reflected in what they found, right? And people were living that experience, and it resonated. But I would put out here on Whole Soul School and Foundation as my own potential philosophy, what if we are not a bunch of separate parts? What if we really are a community of cells and a community of people and a community of a tremendous amount of life here on this planet? Right?
Absolutely.
And I think we're finding our way back in that hero's journey to come back to that connection and that interconnection. And I've said it before on other podcasts, but if separation was such a great model, why is everybody struggling and suffering to the degree that they are on our world today? If it was so fabulous, everybody would be feeling fabulous, because that would be the vibration. But if you look around our world, some people are feeling fabulous. Definitely. There's some people who it's either their time or their karma. It's just time for good karma to find them. And they're having great experiences, and things manifest for them easily, and they live their talents every day. And that's certainly true. On another level, there are many people in this world who are really struggling, who are really in a lot of pain. This has been a world based in duality. It's a world that's changing, and we are in a time of shifts that's bringing us back into the greater awareness that what if we are all part of something bigger than just ourselves, right? That's that awareness shifting from me to we, or what do you say, service to self, service to others. I think a lot of your men found that in your group, right? As an illustration of that. So, and I think, again, to mention our film, that's just something, that's a story that we feel like it needs to be told at this time on the planet. We need more things that reflect more of the truth of who humanity is. And I think it's not a heap of separated parts that are just somehow stumbling around, just trying to survive and exist in this world, but we're actually a precise and perfect part of a much greater whole.
In the movie, I think it's the movie I Am, which we did not feature in this year's go-round, but definitely will next year, I'm sure. There's a segment where they talk about the animal kingdom, and they talk about when you see birds in a flock, and they turn left as a flock and they turn right as a flock. And when you see animals in a herd, they run together. I mean, they're not separate beings. And when you see them from afar, fish, you see fish. What do? They swim in schools, and when you see the whole school move together,
right?
How do they do that? How do the animals do that?
Right.
And there's
and there's an awareness that when they stay together,
yes,
right,
yes,
right, they thrive. And separate, they struggle.
Correct.
Or maybe don't survive.
Exactly. And that's the whole point that's made sort of in the film, and really a powerful concept.
Yeah. And I think we're coming back into that, and where we want to bring that focus back in the conversations this month and in the conversation next month. Certainly, I mean, we've scratched the surface on a lot of these topics.
Oh, on all of them, yes.
Right. But as we round out at least the conversations for this first year for Whole Soul School and Foundation, we really are spotlighting that we are coming back into a greater collaboration and community and wholeness, and that we are, as a collective on this planet, as all human life will begin to thrive again as more and more of us wake up, that it's working together that creates the changes, that creates the life we all want to be living. And that's not just true of us as human beings, but it is true of the animal kingdom.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. And, I just am energetically reminded of the metaphor of the crowdfunding campaign that we're doing right now for the film, which is just showing us that we're bringing people
Yes.
together and joining together to create something beautiful together.
Exactly. And the consciousness, I would, and as it relates to this conversation, is of crowdfunding, tells you if people tried to crowdfund, I don't know, 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago, and whatever people would have given in exchange to support a cause or support a vision, it just wouldn't be as successful as it is right now. Obviously, they didn't have the internet back then, so it makes it easier for us to connect with each other better. But in this, we are really moving into seeing the value of coming together and voting with our energy and voting with our dollar and voting with our consciousness and our attention and the time we spend. There's a lot of ways to support those kind of crowdfunding concepts. And when we looked at the crowdfunding campaigns and the platforms, and you heard some of the impetuses, can you say that, impetuses? I don't know, impeti for starting these platforms. What is amazing is that those things didn't exist. And so a lot of projects, especially Indiegogo, we saw their story, things weren't getting made. Great ideas weren't happening. They weren't manifesting because they didn't have the support for those projects. And, how many authors would be listening to this podcast who know what it's like to write an amazing book and not get a contract, not be able to secure an agent, not be able to get a publishing deal for that brilliant piece of work that you've generated, or artists or musicians or people who make products, or there's so many things that we're just creative, amazing, innovative beings. And so I love the energy that's a good metaphor of what we're talking about, that the crowdfunding really allows people to step up and step in and support those things.
Well, and just add their collective energy, just like in the herd, just like in the flock.
Well, and it's we can go on, I'm sure, but there's things like Patreon where you can support somebody that, in years past might have worked for the news station or gotten a job, and only a few people can get those.
Right.
But, with Patreon, if you really enjoy somebody's messages, you can basically sustain them.
Right.
You can pay $1 a month,
right?
$10 a month. And so we are moving into a time where I think the people are going to support the people again.
Oh, I 100%
and
agree.
that is a reflection of where humanity's consciousness is going, because it's not just a few people that understand this. More and more people are understanding this, and they're realizing that the big corporations, or 6 people in the world own the majority of the companies in the world. Whatever those statistics are, I'm not sure, but it's still a very little few compared to the great numbers of people who are innovators, creators, authors, artists, engineers, scientists, doctors. There's so much talent on this planet that hasn't really had an opportunity to fully express in that Newtonian, separate, competitive, Darwinian model.
Right.
And we're moving into a time of the Bruce Liptons and the Lynn McTaggarts and the Teslas and the Einsteins, who recognized, like the fish, like the birds, that we must work together now. We must work together.
And I think this is a big message of hope, to a good place to land on, because in a time when visually it may not look like what you're saying in our political climate or in our humanity today, the truth is there is such a bigger energy happening, and collective energy happening, and a rising of consciousness. And I just think it's very, very exciting. So
there's a much bigger picture unfolding,
much bigger.
And it's coming from the unseen into the seen.
Correct.
The seen will be the last to know.
Yeah.
Ooh, truly. Right? Yep. And so, well, I want to thank everybody for joining us in this podcast today. We invite you to join us in our second Fireside Chats podcast this month that will hopefully release on the 20th of this month. We usually make it on the 20th of the month to post the second one. But we're going to be focusing on this topic of integrating and weaving the bigger picture through insights from the film The Celestine Prophecy, based on James Redfield's amazing work. And I just wanted to make a special note that if anybody's noticed, but the release dates of some of our podcasts this month got a little jumbled due to our campaign launch on the crowdfunding. We were just talking about that campaign for the film that Lacy and I are in the process of making, entitled Freeing an Incarcerated World. And so we launched that campaign yesterday on the 11/11. It's very exciting, and it's a project that is really, really near and dear to our hearts. And I'm going to put a link in the description section where you can see the trailer, right? You can see the campaign, but even more importantly for us to know is that the message is getting out about what the messages in the film are all about, which is exactly what we've been talking about today.
Yeah.
And the messengers in that film are people who journeyed this personal transformation story arc inside themselves, and they're bringing their messages back to humanity in this film. So Sue Wells joined me from New Zealand, all ready for a podcast. It released yesterday. You should check that out. In the Mind, Body, Spirit, Fitness podcast. It was fantastic. It's definitely something to listen to. We talked about living our authenticity. So living our authenticity is really powerful. So you can find that on YouTube, and you can also find that on our website. Lacy will be having another amazing transformation talks with Michael Norieski, who's going to bring some great insights. He always does. And
we should release that, I think, on the 15th.
We hope to receive. We might be releasing that, Lacy, actually on the 25th, because we're a little jumbled this month.
I forgot. Yeah.
So if you track our dates and our releases, you might get a little bit tangled and pretzelized this month. Don't follow that. Just appreciate the releases as they come, and stay open and surrender
that they're releasing it all.
that they're releasing it all. So I just want to say, Michael is a certified peer support specialist and a certified adult mental health first aid. He's certified in adult mental health first aid, and he works in great service to a higher purpose and greater light by helping people in need who are seeking to reset and rebuild their lives. So he's a fantastic human being. He's an amazing soul, and he's going to be talking with you, Lacy. So that will release this month at some point. And lastly, I have to say I'm so excited for this too. Our very own Whole Soul School and Foundation team member, Flower Diamond, is going to be joining us for a Global Spotlight podcast this month. She's the poet who just writes amazing poems that follow the themes that we share every month.
I'm interested in talking to her because I'm wondering if she actually can talk not in prose, not in poetry.
The whole podcast might be a poem.
Oh my goodness! Don't give her any ideas.
I know, but she's incredibly talented. She's incredibly generous, and every month, I sort of just barely before the month begins, I send her the topic, and she's just so gracious and so generous with all of us that she writes these beautiful poems. And so we're going to hear about her and her talents and some of her journey and story, and I'm very excited about that. And so lastly, I would just say, please subscribe, and share this podcast. Help us spread the word about Whole Soul School and Foundation. You can find us on our website at wholesoulschoolandfoundation.org. And if you feel inspired or inclined to donate, please do so. You could do that through our website. And you can visit us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And that's it. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for journeying with us this year. We're going to have new ideas and new things we're going to bring in 2020. And we're listening to Spirit for what that wants to evolve and emerge to be. So we're staying open, willing, and aware, like we talked about.
And Marie and I did not talk about this, but I would also ask listeners, if you have something that you want us to talk about, that you would like, questions that you would like us to answer, please feel free to email us at wholesoulschool@gmail.com or put a comment under our...
either way. You can email, or you can put a comment in our,
YouTube.
On our YouTube videos. That would be great. And we're looking for more participation. We're looking for more engagement. And we just appreciate your time. We appreciate you joining with us as a living community and bringing these energies forward. And the more that gather, the more that energy ripples out and touches a whole entire planet. So we are grateful for you. We hope you have a fabulous couple of weeks, or until our next podcast releases and we can greet you again. So thanks for spending time with us, and we'll see you soon. Have a great day, everyone. Blessings.